The Hawthorne family at the height of glory. The Hawthorne family name resonated throughout Chicago's social elite, synonymous with old money and enduring influence. Built on generations of business shrewdness and civic engagement, the Hawthornes resided in a stately Georgian mansion atop Lakeshore Drive, surrounded by sweeping views of the city and Lake Michigan's crystalline expanse. At the helm stood Richard Hawthorne, the family patriarch, a man whose handshake had secured million-dollar deals, whose philanthropy graced hospital wings and arts endowments alike. Richard wore his authority comfortably, tempering discipline with warmth. He was respected in the boardroom and loved at home, commanding both with equal ease. Margaret Hawthorne, his wife, moved throughout the city's social circles with quiet confidence, organizing annual charity galas, volunteering at local shelters, and ensuring every social detail, from crystal glassware to heirloom silver, reflected the family's enduring standard. Her gentleness often disguised the resilience that kept the household running smoothly behind the scenes. Their household flourished, not just in material possessions, but in the outward trappings of happiness. Orchestral laughter at garden parties, the aroma of fresh baking wafting from the kitchen, clusters of family photographs lining richly paneled halls. But at the very center of this world stood the Hawthorne children, Olivia and Nathan. Olivia Hawthorne, the elder child, had her father's steady gaze and her mother's gracious poise. From an early age, Olivia seemed born into the role of caregiver. Her presence radiated calmness. Younger cousins and neighborhood children naturally came to her for comfort or counsel. In her father's study, Olivia had learned not only etiquette and investment, but above all, a sense of duty. She managed family affairs with quiet efficiency, often stepping in to support her parents during public events or family crises. Yet, be it arranging her brother's schedules or organizing household staff, none of her good deeds felt burdensome. Her empathy made each gesture natural. People often described her as the heart of the family. Nathan Hawthorne, 2 years Olivia's junior, embodied youthful ambition. Charismatic and self-assured, Nathan excelled in private schools and relished friendly competition, whether on the tennis court or an academic debate. The siblings' bond ran deep, marked by inside jokes and late-night confidences beneath the glow of antique chandeliers. Olivia, ever patient, was Nathan's champion, editing his essays, soothing his frustrations, and celebrating every achievement as if it were her own. Within these walls, the Hawthornes cultivated a sense of shared destiny. Holidays brought extended family from both coasts, guests marveling at Margaret's attention to detail and Richard's booming toasts. The staff, loyal for decades, performed their duties with pride, a reflection of the harmony cultivated within. From the outside, the Hawthorne family lived a life others only dreamed of: wealth, professional respect, and familial closeness. Newspaper profiles spoke admiringly of the Hawthorne legacy. To friends and business associates, their mansion seemed a bulwark against life's uncertainties, a sanctuary defined by stability, tradition, and unity. Yet, beneath the perfectly polished veneer, subtle undercurrents hinted at the complex interplay of personalities and unspoken sacrifices, a story not yet told, shadows cast by the brilliance of their glory. Silent sacrifices. Within the grandeur of the Hawthorne mansion, beneath the imposing chandeliers and the routine of elegant dinners, Olivia's world revolved quietly but relentlessly around her family. From the outside, life appeared effortless, choreographed with the sort of grace and discipline that matched the family's status. But it was Olivia's unseen diligence, her willingness to place others' needs above her own, that kept the delicate balance alive. Each morning, long before the soft sounds of domestic staff echoed through the marble hallways, Olivia was awake. She would stride quietly through the corridors, reviewing the day's schedule. Her father's meetings, her mother's volunteer commitments, Nathan's lessons, her own tasks. The staff admired Olivia for her attention to detail. Not only did she recall everyone's preferences, from how Nathan liked his eggs to which flowers brightened her mother's day, but she made sure the smallest gestures carried warmth and meaning. Olivia's sense of responsibility was instinctive rather than forced. When her mother was overwhelmed preparing for a charity auction, Olivia composed invitations, fielded RSVPs, and reviewed seating arrangements late into the night. When a family member fell ill, it was Olivia who brewed tea, arranged doctor's visits, and offered gentle reassurance. She became a central axis others could rely on, though her touch was so light it often went unacknowledged. Much of Olivia's energy was devoted to Nathan. Only 2 years apart, the siblings had always enjoyed a deep connection, but as Nathan matured, their differences began to emerge. Nathan's world expanded through privilege and opportunity. He attended exclusive schools, traveled for debate tournaments, and returned home brimming with stories and new ambitions. Olivia quietly facilitated his rise, editing his essays, coaching him through social faux pas, and even stepping in to shield him from their father's rare but sharp disappointment. Through it all, Olivia suppressed her own frustrations, rarely voicing them even in her private journals. She declined party invitations from friends, choosing instead to help Nathan prepare applications, research scholarships, or give him rides to late practices. When Nathan's victories were celebrated, Olivia stood in the background, her pride genuine, but her presence unobtrusive. If she felt the sting of invisibility, she masked it with encouragement and grace. Nathan's ambitions, once innocent, started taking a sharper edge. He became more assertive at home, occasionally dismissive of Olivia's advice. There were evenings when he would question why she didn't pursue more for herself, or lightly joke about her maternal streak. Olivia brushed these comments off, telling herself Nathan would come to understand one day. Still, in quiet moments, a passing glance at her own unopened college acceptance letters, the echo of Nathan's laughter as he relished another small victory, Olivia wondered if her sacrifices would ever truly be recognized. Their parents, immersed in their own roles, rarely noticed the shifting dynamic. Richard praised Nathan's successes at Sunday brunches, while Margaret showered Olivia with affection, but also took her help for granted. Olivia wore their expectations like a cloak, comforting, yet heavy. Despite the subtle changes, Olivia never allowed herself to question her sense of duty. In her mind, the family's cohesion depended on her ability to smooth over discord, to remain steady no matter the cost. She resolved that any conflict or jealousy was secondary to Nathan's happiness and the family's pristine image. As spring unfurled through the Hawthorne gardens, Olivia found solace in small private rituals. Journaling on a secluded balcony, playing Chopin on the grand piano in the twilight, walking the grounds with the housedog by her side. These moments restored her, quiet interludes in a life largely dictated by others' needs. Yet just beneath the surface, unseen tensions gathered strength. Olivia's sacrifices, once freely given, risked silently eroding her own sense of self. The delicate balance she worked so hard to preserve was not as unbreakable as it appeared. Even as she carried her burdens with unwavering grace, the seeds of future conflict, misunderstanding, resentment, and ambition were gently taking root. The unexpected tragedy. A subtle chill lingered in the air, as though the Hawthorne mansion itself sensed the looming shadow. It began on an otherwise ordinary morning in late April, when sunlight filtered through linen curtains and the house seemed to hum with the gentle routines of privilege. Olivia moved through her mother's sunlit breakfast room, setting out fresh croissants and calling up the staff roster for the day, her mind already on Nathan's upcoming debate tournament. Amidst this normalcy, an urgent call shattered the illusion. Richard Hawthorne had collapsed on his way to a board meeting downtown, his powerful heart felled by an unanticipated attack. By the time the family arrived at the hospital, Chicago's spring light had given way to a sullen gray, the world tilting off its familiar axis. Olivia clung to her mother's trembling hand as the doctor's words rang hollowly. There was nothing more they could do. Margaret's composure crumbled in a rush of anguished sobs, and Nathan, usually so self-assured, stood silent, visibly shaken for perhaps the first time in his life. In the days that followed, the Hawthorne mansion became a locus of grief. Floral tributes lined the entryway, and visitors streamed through the doors, their murmurs and gentle condolences unable to fill the void left by Richard's absence. Margaret retreated into herself, lost in a fog of remembrance, while Nathan withdrew to his room, avoiding company and brooding. It fell mostly to Olivia, the practiced caretaker, to undertake the necessary arrangements, liaising with funeral services, sifting through condolence letters, receiving visitors with the dignity her father would have expected. The funeral was a grand affair, befitting Richard Hawthorne's standing. The city's influential poured into the family's church pews. Business partners, politicians, philanthropists, and the press captured images for society pages. Olivia, black-clad and dignified, supported her mother at the altar. When Nathan finally spoke, delivering an eloquent but unexpectedly cool eulogy, the guests saw echoes of Richard's charisma, but Olivia alone caught a flicker of something else in his gaze, something steeled. It was in the somber days after the funeral that the next storm arrived. The family lawyer summoned Margaret, Olivia, and Nathan to the library, a stately room scented with leather and old books. The air was thick with anticipation as the will was read aloud. Richard Hawthorne, ever meticulous, had planned for every eventuality. To Margaret, he left a generous lifetime trust and the family home, but the majority of his business holdings, investment portfolio, and controlling shares were bequeathed not to Nathan, as many might have assumed, but to Olivia. The shock was palpable. Olivia herself was speechless, the responsibility and honor outweighing even her own expectations. She glanced instinctively at Nathan for comfort, but instead saw his features stiffen, first with disbelief, then with something sharper. Margaret gasped, her mourning momentarily eclipsed by surprise. After the meeting, Nathan was nowhere to be found. For days, he avoided his sister's eyes, responding to her attempts at consolation with short, brittle words. His presence at meals became perfunctory. He shut himself in his room or left the house for long stretches, returning with a coldness Olivia hadn't seen before. Estrangement crept in where trust once lived. Olivia, both burdened and bewildered by her father's decision, ached for the brother who now felt impossibly distant. The mansion's opulent halls, once alive with the buzz of family unity, now echoed with absence. Olivia wandered those halls at night, replaying the lawyer's words, longing for guidance that would never come. Beneath the stately facade of the Hawthornes, fault lines had opened, and no amount of grace or devotion could immediately close them. The world Olivia had worked so quietly and tirelessly to preserve had fractured, and she faced, alone, the impossible task of holding it together. The betrayal. Olivia stood at her father's study window as April slid into May, the city's noise muffled by the mansion's thick walls. Outside, the hawthorn gardens bloomed with silent splendor. But inside, life felt both unfamiliar and threateningly fragile. The loss of Richard Hawthorne had left a central void in every room. The echoes of his authority and the warmth of his presence had not faded. They had simply become spectral, haunting the family's routines. After the will's reading, a peculiar hush settled over Hawthorne House. Olivia sensed a subtle but insistent shift, as if people were speaking in coded glances and unfinished sentences just out of her hearing. Margaret, still grieving, grew more reclusive, depending on Olivia for nearly everything. A word with the housekeeper, a gentle nudge to eat, the organization of every condolence visit. Nathan, however, had become a shadow, slipping in and out like a ghost. He no longer met her eyes at the breakfast table and, if spoken to, answered in clipped, artificial tones. Even the staff seemed more reserved, their usual robust chatter replaced by awkward silences as Olivia entered a room. Yet life pressed forward, propelled by responsibilities and the need to settle Richard's affairs. Olivia attended meetings with the family lawyer, Charles Whitmore, a man who had known her father for decades. At first, Charles displayed the paternal affability she remembered. Always patient, always willing to clarify legal jargon and answer her questions thoroughly. But over the course of several weeks, Olivia noticed subtle lapses that unsettled her. Missing paperwork, delayed financial summaries, requests for additional signatures with unclear explanations. When she asked about routine statements for the estate's investment accounts, Charles hesitated, offering vague reassurances and blaming clerical backlogs. Olivia's initial concerns were easily dismissed. Grief made every process seem insurmountable, but small, discordant notes kept ringing. Letters from her father's business partners arrived, asking about decisions made in Olivia's name, decisions she had never authorized. One day, while sorting through mail in her mother's parlor, she found a letter from the family's lead accountant addressed to Nathan. It mentioned a transfer of liquid assets, again, supposedly under Olivia's direction. Her pulse quickened as she searched for context, combing through email records and estate files. Gradually, a pattern emerged. Assets were being consolidated not to her new trust, but to accounts Nathan controlled with Whitmore's assistance. When she questioned Charles, he responded with practiced calm, explaining that these were temporary measures to ensure liquidity for Margaret's welfare. But Olivia's doubts refused to subside. The next day, she tried to locate certain documents in her father's locked desk drawer, quarterly statements he always reviewed and filed meticulously. Instead, she found only blank notepads and a scattering of loose receipts. That night, unable to sleep, she replayed conversations with Charles and Nathan in her mind, snatches of dialogue she had dismissed at the time, but which now crackled with secret meaning. Nathan had been spending more time at the law offices downtown, consulting with associates she did not recognize. When asked about his activities, he bristled. "It's my duty to take care of things Mom and you can't handle. You've had enough on your plate lately." Despite the growing alarm, Olivia hesitated to involve Margaret. Her mother's grief had become immobilizing. Margaret drifted through days in a haze, grasping at the past, honoring every request from the lawyer without question, reacting to Nathan's explanations with foggy acquiescence. Feeling increasingly isolated, Olivia turned to her father's closest friend, Henry Barrett, a retired judge whom Richard had trusted implicitly. Barrett agreed to visit under the pretense of paying respects, listening with sympathetic patience as Olivia voiced her worries in the library one afternoon. His brow furrowed deeply as she listed the discrepancies. "Trust your instincts, Olivia," he urged quietly. "If something feels wrong, it probably is. Your father put his faith in you. Don't let that be undermined." Bolstered by Barrett's encouragement, Olivia determined to seek the truth. For days, she pored over every available account ledger and legal document, making copies with trembling hands. At times, she felt as if the world itself was gaslighting her. Her concerns dismissed by Whitmore, her access to certain information suddenly restricted with excuses about privacy and confidentiality. Even long-serving staff members now seemed distant, some offering polite but empty reassurances, while others avoided her eyes entirely. It became painfully clear that Nathan had orchestrated a deliberate campaign to block her at every turn. She overheard snippets of conversation between him and Whitmore, hushed voices behind closed doors that fell silent as she approached. Nathan began to spin stories about Olivia to relatives and household staff, claiming she was overwhelmed by grief and not coping well. Even Margaret, normally so attuned to Olivia, seemed more accepting of Nathan's growing control. "Let Nathan handle these things, dear. You need rest." For Olivia, the deepest hurt came not from the shifting of finances, but from the feeling of utter betrayal. The brother she had shielded and championed for years now treated her like an adversary. She recalled long ago nights when Nathan had confided his fears to her, and she had helped him find confidence where self-doubt had threatened to bloom. That trust, it now seemed, had been replaced by calculation. Nathan's demeanor, so recently affectionate if distracted, became openly dismissive and at times coldly mocking. One particularly raw evening, unable to sleep, Olivia overheard Nathan and Charles Whitmore in the study. Their voices, muffled by the thick oak door, were tinged with impatience. "She's starting to ask too many questions," Nathan said. Olivia stood frozen in the darkness, her heart pounding. She realized she had become an outsider in her own home, her instincts and generosity weaponized against her. For years, she had been the mediator, the protector, the silent engine of their family's happiness. Now, as each day passed, she became acutely aware that no one else was looking out for her. The pain settled deep into her bones. Not rage exactly, but a bruising sense of displacement and despair. In rare moments of solitude, Olivia allowed herself to grieve more than her father's death. She grieved the brother she thought she had, the vision of family unity she had spent her life upholding, the easy faith she once placed in the people closest to her. Her world, so carefully preserved, had been turned inside out, and though she longed to retreat into the safety of old routines, her music, her quiet moments of reflection, she knew on some level that the person she had been no longer existed. The stakes had shifted. By late June, the transformation was complete. Nathan now ran essential meetings, handled estate lawyers, and took overt ownership of family decisions. Charles Whitmore became curt and impatient toward Olivia, often reminding her that Nathan now represents the family's best interests. Olivia, once consulted on every matter, was relegated to the status of a figurehead. When she attempted to assert her legal rights as named in Richard's will, she was met with smooth gaslighting, her memory questioned, her understanding undermined, her intentions doubted. The betrayal felt total. Family friends, coached by Nathan and Charles, began to distance themselves from Olivia, gently suggesting she try to move on and focus on self-care. The staff, instructed to reroute her calls and deny her access to certain rooms, feigned helplessness. At night, Olivia lay awake, replaying arguments, dissecting moments of subtle deceit, and vowing she would not let this treachery stand. In the quietest, loneliest hours, vengeance began to surface. Not just a desire for justice, but the burning need to reclaim the life and identity that had been so ruthlessly stolen from her. Forced to the very margins of her own existence, Olivia's sorrow kindled into a resolve she had never known before. And so, with the last remnants of blind trust extinguished, Olivia Hawthorne turned her face toward the coming storm. Not as the family's gentle heart, but as a woman betrayed, ready to fight for justice in a world grown cold. The pursuit of justice. The fracture within the Hawthorne family, once concealed beneath layers of decorum and tradition, was now exposed for what it truly was, a gaping wound. Olivia had spent weeks navigating a landscape where trust had evaporated, and the familiar faces around her had become either silent witnesses or passive conspirators. The sense of displacement was total, yet somewhere within that desolation, a spark flickered into life. At first, the prospect of fighting back seemed impossible. Olivia had never sought conflict. Her greatest strength had always been in knitting people together, not tearing them apart. But the knowledge that Nathan and Whitmore had conspired to rob her, not just of money, but of the future her father had entrusted to her, ignited a new kind of fire. Olivia realized that if she gave in now, if she consented to the narrative of her own helplessness, she would forsake all the values her family was supposed to embody. The first challenge was isolation. Nathan's influence extended through the Hawthorne network. Family friends, business partners, even some members of the household staff. Olivia encountered polite deflections and disapproving glances whenever she attempted to ask questions. The few who sympathized did so quietly, nervously, as if fearing Nathan's growing authority. Olivia knew she needed concrete evidence and she needed help. But whom could she trust? She began with Henry Barrett, the retired judge who had once been her father's closest friend. Olivia arranged a discreet lunch in a quiet corner of a downtown restaurant, far from the ears and eyes of the social world she used to belong to. Barrett listened gravely as Olivia recounted what she'd discovered: forged signatures, missing documents, suspicious transfers, staff who claimed sudden amnesia. His face grew ever more serious as she laid out her findings, folder by folder, note by note. "You must be thorough, Olivia," Barrett advised. "Collect everything, make copies. Don't confront anyone directly until you've built an unbreakable case. And above all, don't let them bait you into rash action. The law is slow, but when you have the facts, it can be your greatest ally." That conversation marked the beginning of Olivia's new existence, a life defined by secrecy and determination. She set up a private workspace in a little-used guest room, lining the walls with timelines, transaction ledgers, and handwritten notes. Each night, she methodically reviewed years of her father's correspondence, looking for discrepancies in signatures, odd addendums to contracts, or sudden changes in legal documents. She learned to read the language of legal loopholes and to track money as it flowed through layers of shell companies and obscure trusts. Getting new information was no simple task. Whitmore, growing aware of her curiosity, made subtle moves to restrict her access. Passwords on computer files changed. Key documents, once kept in the open, disappeared from their usual locations. Some staff, especially those who had been recently hired, became cold toward her requests. Olivia masked her intentions with careful politeness, asking for things that seemed trivial, or accidentally entering rooms she wasn't supposed to be in to search for hidden papers. The very air in the Hawthorne mansion seemed charged with suspicion. Olivia learned to move quietly, to slip along back hallways at night, to eavesdrop on conversations behind heavy oak doors. There were moments, heart-pounding ones, when she came perilously close to being caught rifling through an office drawer or downloading bank statements onto a USB drive from the family computer. More than once, she heard footsteps pause outside her improvised war room, her breath coming hard until the danger passed. It helped that Barrett discreetly referred her to a junior attorney at his old law firm, a young woman named Jessica Lee, who agreed to meet Olivia under the pretense of simple estate planning. Jessica, energetic and detail-oriented, listened intently to Olivia's account before offering practical advice. How paper trails work, what sort of forensic accountants she'd need to engage, and what laws Whitmore and Nathan might have violated if her claims could be backed up. "You need patience," Jessica warned. "Cases like this are won with evidence, not emotion." The process was painstaking and lonely. There were days when Olivia felt like giving up, overwhelmed by the sheer scope of her adversaries. Nathan, meanwhile, was a whirlwind of calculated charm in public, hosting summer garden parties, fielding calls from the family's investment advisors, and appearing in magazine spreads about the next generation of Hawthornes. His apparent success and ease only made Olivia's task more daunting, feeding a narrative within family circles that she was envious or unstable. What Olivia hadn't anticipated was how deeply Nathan's betrayal had eroded her own sense of self. She wrestled with guilt. Was she truly the right person to inherit? Had her father been mistaken? At night, the questions circled endlessly, her confidence eroded by subtle barbs from Nathan and Whitmore, by her mother's resigned silence, and by the coldness of former family friends. Jessica helped her reframe her mission. "You aren't just fighting for yourself, Olivia. You're fighting for the truth, for what your father worked his whole life to build. They're counting on you to break." It was this faith, tenuous though it felt, that kept her moving. Summer seeped into the city, the light golden upon the lake, and Olivia's determination deepened with the changing season. She forged small alliances, an accountant who had noticed unusual withdrawals, a staff member who whispered that Whitmore's visits were never quite right. Carefully, Olivia gathered sworn statements, copied emails, surveillance logs, and even security camera footage. Each piece, a puzzle fragment, slowly formed a larger picture of Nathan and Whitmore's collusion. Every breakthrough brought new obstacles. Margaret, continuing in her private fog of grief, could not be roused to Olivia's side. She trusted Nathan, her only son, implicitly. Olivia's efforts to nudge her mother toward reality often ended in tears or angry dismissals. "You're making it worse," Margaret would say, voice trembling. "This family has suffered enough." Each setback, each betrayal, even by those she'd once considered allies, only hardened Olivia's resolve. The injustice was too glaring, the risk too great to abandon the truth. She began keeping a journal, not just of evidence, but of her fears and anger, her tiny victories and setbacks. This nightly ritual became a source of strength, a reminder that she was not merely an accessory to her own story, but its author. Late one August evening, as a summer storm rattled the mansion's ancient windows, Olivia stood in her father's study and made a silent vow. "Dad, I will not let you down." She felt the certainty settle within her, a sense of fulfillment not tied to wealth or recognition, but to the clarity of her purpose. She would expose what had been done, no matter the cost to her name or heart. By now, word had spread in certain circles that Olivia was causing trouble. Former friends offered cautious warnings. A cousin called to say she'd heard Nathan threatening legal action to have Olivia declared unfit. The machinery of power and rumor churned, but at the center, Olivia stood firm. With Barrett and Jessica's guidance and a growing trove of evidence, Olivia filed her first civil complaint, a legal gauntlet thrown squarely at Nathan's feet. It would mean a public fight, the airing of family business, the loss of whatever innocence remained. Still, she felt emboldened. Though the path ahead was uncertain, Olivia greeted each day with a discipline and resolve she had never known before. She understood the price of justice, but she also saw, for the first time, her own worth. Not as a caretaker in the shadow of others, but as a rightful heir and a woman unwilling to be erased. And so, with the first step taken, Olivia Hawthorne readied herself for the next storm, determined that the world, from the courts of law to the gilded drawing rooms of Chicago, would finally see the truth. The courtroom confrontation. The fall of Chicago brought a subtle, restless chill. Trees along Lakeshore Drive gave up the last of their summer green, and the city settled into the somber gold and steel of September. For Olivia, the season's change marked not only a shift in weather, but a new chapter of public reckoning. The day her case went to trial, a dense fog settled over the city, a fitting metaphor for the uncertainty and apprehension clinging to the Hawthorne legacy. It was no ordinary lawsuit. The city's society, pages whispered about the Hawthorne family civil war, reporters jockeying for position outside Cook County Courthouse each morning. Every motion filed, every name entered into evidence, threatened to stain a carefully curated family legacy. And as Olivia entered the old granite building, evidence box in hand and heart hammering, she felt the weight of generations on her shoulders. For months, Olivia had prepared herself for this moment. Jessica Lee, her fiercely intelligent young attorney, walked beside her, her attitude crisp, her strategy airtight. Together, they had built a case thread by thread, each document and email a stitch in a tapestry designed to expose not only the technical violations of trust and power, but also the very personal betrayal at the heart of the matter. The courtroom itself felt cold and cavernous, the judge presiding from his elevated mahogany bench. Bailiffs and clerks moving in crisp, rehearsed patterns. Nathan was already seated at the defendant's table, immaculate in a tailored navy suit. If he was nervous, he hid it behind the same effortless confidence that had once made him the darling of the Hawthorne boardrooms. Charles Whitmore hovered just behind him, legal pad in hand, whispering in Nathan's ear even before proceedings began. The sight of her brother, so familiar yet so altered, sent a bolt of pain through Olivia's resolve. But there was no room for hesitation now. Opening arguments cracked the courtroom silence. Jessica's words cut through the air with quiet precision, outlining the systematic disregard for Richard Hawthorne's will, the forged signatures, the paper trail of assets siphoned away under the guise of temporary measures. The evidence, she assured the jury, would speak for itself. Beneath the legal jargon was a simple story of trust betrayed for personal ambition. Whitmore, in defense, painted a very different picture. His baritone voice resonated with practiced concern, suggesting that Olivia, overwhelmed by grief, had misunderstood routine administrative transitions, that the real priority was Margaret's welfare and family cohesion. Occasionally, Nathan glanced at Olivia, but his gaze held neither regret nor apology. Instead, there was a cool calculation in his eyes, sharpened by the combative logic of the adversarial process. The days that followed were an unyielding procession of testimony and cross-examination. For the public gallery, peopled with gawking spectators, whispering society reporters, and a handful of Olivia's remaining supporters, it was high drama. For Olivia, it was personal hell mixed with fleeting vindication. Jessica presented key witnesses: the family accountant, who described flagging suspicious transfers; Barrett, who testified to Olivia's character and diligence; a disillusioned staff member, who recounted new instructions to reroute information and restrict Olivia's movements. Piece by piece, a narrative emerged of deliberate manipulation, a joint enterprise between Nathan and Whitmore designed to edge Olivia out of her inheritance, out of her very home. Yet the defense countered at every turn. Whitmore's cross-examinations were aggressive, often bordering on intimidation. He painted Olivia as meddling, unstable, and unqualified to manage the Hawthorne fortune. He dredged up old family emails and referenced moments where Olivia had, for the sake of harmony, deferred decisions. Not as proof of her reliability as a peacemaker, but as evidence of indecision. Nathan, called to the stand, played his part with chilling skill. He spoke of duty to his mother, his desire to protect family assets, his regret at the discord that had arisen. When pressed on discrepancies or emails that contradicted his testimony, he feigned confusion or blamed the volatile period after their father's death. The courtroom buzzed with every exchange. Some members of the jury watched Olivia with quiet sympathy, others with skepticism, all caught in the gravity of the family feud. Olivia herself was forced to testify for hours. Jessica paced her through every step, but the cross-examination by Whitmore was brutal. He pried into her motivations, her supposed emotional instability, even suggesting that her loyalty to family had blinded her to simple practicalities. At one point, his voice dropped to a whisper, echoing across the silent courtroom. "Miss Hawthorne, do you really believe you would have been chosen if your father had seen how incapable you are of letting go?" Olivia's hand shook beneath the table, but she met his stare. "I believe my father knew exactly who I am. That's why he trusted me, and why I will see this through." Outside court, the media circus raged. Headlines speculated about secret family feuds, socialites turned whistleblowers, and the future of the Hawthorne millions. Olivia, once the silent backbone of every Hawthorne event, now found herself photographed leaving court, microphones thrust in her face, each gesture scrutinized for signs of stress or weakness. Some letters of support arrived, old family friends expressing shame at Nathan's tactics. Others wrote to urge her to settle, to keep the family's dirty laundry out of the public eye. Margaret remained conspicuously absent, too fragile to withstand the ordeal. She stayed cloistered in the mansion, answering no calls, offering no statements. Olivia, at times, felt bereft, as if fighting for a family that was already gone. Evenings offered little solace. Back in her rented apartment, Olivia would pace beside boxes of evidence, replaying moments from court, an answer that could have been sharper, a hesitation that might have weakened her testimony. But Jessica assured her, "You're standing for the truth. Juries feel that. Let the facts and your integrity do their work." As the trial wore on, the Hawthorne name faded from pageantry into something raw, almost mythic, a cautionary tale whispered in dinner parties and law school classrooms. Yet within the courthouse walls, Olivia sensed a subtle shift. The evidence mounted. Whitmore's careful facade began to crack as emails surfaced that directly contradicted his protestations. Nathan grew increasingly tense under questioning, his rehearsed testimony beginning to unravel when faced with documentation of backdoor withdrawals and contradictory signatures. In the courtroom's hush, there were moments where Olivia caught Nathan's gaze, brief flashes of old camaraderie drowned by resentment and loss. She wondered, with a pang that surprised her, whether there was any bridge left between them at all, or if this battle had burned it forever. As both sides delivered their closing arguments, the stakes had never felt higher. Jessica's last words echoed. "This case isn't just about law. It's about honoring a legacy, about the simple expectation that family can trust one another. Sometimes, justice is the last gift we give to those who cannot speak for themselves." The jury withdrew. The world waited. Olivia, exhausted but unwavering, realized that something fundamental had shifted. No matter the outcome, she had defied the machinery constructed to silence her. She had claimed her place, her story, and forced an entire city to see the truth behind the marble facade. And as the courtroom emptied that autumn afternoon, Olivia Hawthorne walked into the uncertain light of October, steadied not by guarantees, but by the knowledge that she had been brave enough to fight for the integrity of everything and everyone she loved. The truth exposed. The tension in the courtroom was palpable, heavy as a summer storm on the verge of breaking. Days of testimony, cross-examinations, and mounting evidence had left everyone, jury, attorneys, and spectators alike, on edge. Yet, as the trial neared its climax, an air of anticipation hovered, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath for the moment the whole truth would finally come into the light. Olivia had known risks would accompany her pursuit of justice. What she hadn't counted on was the loneliness of being the solitary voice against a tide of denial. Still, she pressed on, night after night, poring over documents in her rented apartment, following money trails, time-stamped emails, and logging even the smallest inconsistency in a battered notebook. It was on the morning of what would become the most pivotal day of the trial that Jessica, her attorney, glanced up from a newly admitted batch of financial disclosures with a look Olivia hadn't seen before, an urgent, almost incredulous spark flaring in her eyes. "I think we have it," she whispered, beckoning Olivia to her side. She pointed out a cluster of electronic transfers, marked by a forged signature and linked with a hidden trust in Nathan's name. The evidence didn't just hint at wrongdoing. It mapped out, in digital ink, the deliberate siphoning of Hawthorne assets orchestrated by Nathan and abetted by Whitmore. Armed with this, Jessica and Olivia spent the next hours adding the final pieces to their presentation. When court reconvened, the air seemed different, thicker, sharper. Society reporters and city columnists jostled in the rear gallery, sensing that the Hawthorne saga's most sensational revelations were about to break. Jessica began with quiet confidence, walking the jury through every detail: the patterns of withdrawal, the unsigned authorizations, and emails in which Whitmore's tone, once formal, subtly shifted into that of a collaborator. Screens projected Olivia's annotated spreadsheets and side-by-side comparisons of signatures, one demonstrably her own, the other a close but flawed imitation. Then came the bombshell. Jessica requested the court's permission to introduce a secure video call with a forensic cybersecurity expert. The witness, calm and methodical, explained how digital forensics uncovered transactions linked to Nathan and Whitmore's encrypted email exchanges and how IP logs tied the activity to their personal devices. This wasn't just circumstantial evidence. It was a digital fingerprint, undeniable and exact. The murmurs in the gallery swelled as the jury watched a step-by-step reconstruction. The scheme's audacity laid bare. Every justification offered by Nathan, claims of administrative necessity, concern for Margaret's welfare, confusion and grief, crumbled beneath the weight of facts. The expert explained that not only had Nathan manufactured signatures, but Whitmore had also set up an intricate web of shell entities to disguise movement of the largest assets. Nathan, for the first time since the proceedings began, appeared visibly shaken. His usual poise fractured. He clenched the edge of the defendant's table, jaw set hard, eyes fixed on some distant point above the jury box. Whitmore, too, lost his practiced composure, his objections more frantic and less persuasive as the evidence was laid out with relentless clarity. Public reaction was swift. News alerts about the trial ricocheted through the media. Evidence of Hawthorne embezzlement revealed. Legal expert: family betrayal unprecedented in Chicago elite. And siblings in bitter courtroom showdown. Olivia's name, once relegated to society pages as the dutiful daughter and event organizer, became that of a whistleblower, a figure of principle standing against the rot of privilege. Social media, too, buzzed with commentary. Supportive strangers posted messages of encouragement and solidarity. Even people once skeptical of Olivia's quest now expressed admiration for her courage and persistence. The tide of public sentiment, once aligned with the familiar charm and good looks of Nathan and the gravitas of Whitmore's reputation, shifted decisively. Days before, family acquaintances had suggested a quiet settlement to spare everyone further embarrassment. Now, those same voices quietly disavowed Nathan's behavior, some scrambling to protect their own reputations. Behind the grand drama, however, the real consequences unfolded in private. Margaret, shielded from the worst, could not ignore news that now flashed across every living room screen. At home, her world narrowed to hushed phone calls and visits from long-silent relatives, all seeking reassurance that the family would somehow survive intact. Olivia visited her one evening, finding her mother rigid and pale by the library window. Margaret didn't turn as Olivia entered, but spoke in a voice that sounded decades older. "Everything your father built, all that trust. How did it come to this?" Olivia wished she could give an answer, but no words seemed adequate. Nathan could no longer escape the collective judgment. Hawthorne House, always overflowing with visitors, found itself shunned. The staff, whose loyalties had once seemed fluid or ambiguous, now treated Olivia with deference. Nathan's former confidants withdrew. Text messages returned unanswered, invitations rescinded. In court, the pressure reached its peak. The judge, having listened for weeks to procedural fencing and emotional appeals, grew visibly exasperated with Whitmore's final attempts at misdirection. When called to answer questions about his involvement, the lawyer faltered, his testimony riddled with contradictions, his timeline collapsing under cross-examination. The jury's demeanor changed as well. Skepticism gave way to understanding, compassion tipping from Nathan to Olivia. In closing argument, Jessica reframed the entire case not as a simple battle for money, but as one for family honor and accountability. No one, however privileged, however trusted, should have the unfettered power to rewrite the truth. Today, you have the tools to set that record straight. When Olivia herself was called for a final statement, her voice was unwavering but full of emotion. "I never wanted this fight," she said, "but I could not accept a lie about my father, my family, or myself. I stand here so that no one else, whatever their last name, has to be erased by betrayal." After proceedings adjourned for the day, the city outside seemed transformed. Reporters rushed to publish their stories. Whispers in office buildings, bars, and private clubs centered on the Hawthorne's fate. Olivia, exhausted but vindicated, left the courthouse just as the sky flared a luminous autumn gold, the air crisp and clear for the first time in weeks. For all the public commotion, her victory was a quiet one. The truth, whatever pain it had brought, belonged to her now. And so, as the Hawthorne scandal reverberated through Chicago's corridors of wealth and power, the foundation for justice was finally, unmistakably laid bare. The cost had been immense, but the mask of grace and tradition that once shrouded the Hawthorne name had been replaced. At the last, with the clear, unsparing light of truth. Judgment Day. The courthouse was shrouded in a tense, almost reverent silence the morning the verdict was to be read. Heavy clouds pressed against the glass above the rotunda, diffusing gray light through the hallways and painting the marble floors in muted shadows. Outside, television vans clustered at the curb. Inside, the air buzzed with a nervous electricity. Journalists, lawyers, and onlookers jostled for position, all awaiting the next turn in what had become the most sensational family saga Chicago had seen in years. Olivia sat alone at her table, hands folded together, the soft fabric of her suit sleeve pleated with tension. Beside her, Jessica Lee methodically reviewed case notes one final time, her usual confidence measured with a new solemnity. The courtroom itself seemed to strain under the weight of expectation. The jury, their faces drawn and tired after days of deliberation, filed into the box in single file, refusing to meet the eyes of either party. Nathan, immaculate as ever, sat rigid beside Whitmore, his attorney. But his posture broadcast a vulnerability he'd never revealed before. No longer able to rely on inherited charm or confidence, he stared down at the polished wood tabletop, fingers pressed tightly together. Whitmore remained fixed in a lawyer's mask of composure, but his every gesture was clipped, his notes scattered and careworn. Judge Baldwin rapped the gavel, calling the room to order. In that instant, every whisper fell away, replaced by the thudding silence of expectation. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" the judge intoned. "We have, Your Honor," replied the foreperson, her voice carrying a gravity that marked the trial's long, winding passage. As the verdict form was passed to the bailiff, Olivia's mind spun with flashes of the past year. The first night she'd suspected betrayal, hours spent poring over documents in a guest room, moments of doubt and resolve, faces of allies and subtle adversaries alike. She remembered her father's trust, warmth, the legacy he'd meant to preserve. She took a shaky breath and forced herself to remain present, grounded in what awaited her. The clerk read the decision, each word hanging heavy in the crowded chamber. "In the matter of Hawthorne versus Hawthorne and Whitmore, on the charge of breach of fiduciary duty and fraud, we find in favor of the plaintiff, Ms. Olivia Hawthorne." For a heartbeat, it seemed the clock itself stopped ticking. Then the reality set in, a surge of relief, disbelief, and vindication all at once. A murmur swept through the gallery. Some gasped, others shook their heads. Reporters scrawled furiously, gripping their phones, capturing the moment for headlines that would ripple through morning news feeds and evening conversations throughout Chicago's upper echelons. Jessica squeezed Olivia's hand beneath the table, her whisper fierce. "You did." Olivia barely responded, the enormity of what the verdict meant surging through her veins like an unexpected thaw after a long winter. Judge Baldwin's voice resumed, crisp and clear. All disputed assets are to be restored to Ms. Hawthorne's trust. The court finds Mr. Nathan Hawthorne and Mr. Charles Whitmore liable for intentional misrepresentation and breach of trust. Further, the matter of criminal referral has been submitted to the state's attorney's office for review. Whitmore's face finally slipped from its mask. Confusion and outrage flickered before composure returned. Nathan's face, pale and taut, revealed a hollowness Olivia had never seen. Margaret Hawthorne was notably absent, still recovering from the shock of public scandal and her own disillusionment. But Olivia could imagine her mother at home, sheltered by curtains and silence, wrestling with the twin burdens of grief and relief. As the gavel fell to adjourn the session, the courtroom splintered into chaos. Clattering cameras, the popping of flashbulbs, hushed congratulations from Jessica and Barrett, and reluctant handshakes from a few old acquaintances. Olivia's former friends, those who had quietly doubted her, tiptoed away in the darkest moments. Now sent tentative smiles, hesitant as spring sunlight after weeks of rain. Nathan's collapse was more private, a single, broken moment when he finally looked up, eyes red, and met Olivia's gaze for the first time in months. It was not a plea for forgiveness nor a look of hatred, but a mournful recognition of all that had been lost. Then, with slow, deliberate footsteps, he exited the courtroom alongside officers and his discredited attorney. His fall from grace complete. Outside, the air was sharp and cold, the city humming just beyond the courthouse steps. Reporters swarmed, their questions tumbling over one another. "Miss Hawthorne, will you press criminal charges?" "Olivia, what do you say to those who sided with your brother? Are you satisfied with this outcome?" Olivia answered only briefly, her words steady but gentle. "I believe in the truth. I believe the law has spoken. This was never about vengeance, but about honoring my father's wishes and protecting what he built for all of us." The consequences of the verdict were swift and decisive. The Hawthorne assets were transferred back to Olivia's control by court order, including the family's investment portfolio, the majority stake in Hawthorne Industries, and all primary real estate holdings. Nathan was ordered to relinquish any claim of representation, his accounts frozen pending further investigation. Whitmore faced immediate suspension from the state bar, and murmurs in legal circles suggested disbarment and possible indictment loomed. Social fallout followed. Invitations to galas never arrived at Hawthorne House. Nathan's and Whitmore's reputations were in tatters. Friends disappeared overnight. Charitable boards quietly removed their names. For the first time in decades, the Hawthorne family name was associated with scandal, and also, paradoxically, courageous reclamation. Yet for Olivia, the victory was bittersweet. In her heart, she knew justice had been done, but the cost was immeasurable. Her relationship with her only brother was shattered, the close-knit unity of her childhood relegated now to photographs in the silent hallways of the mansion. At home, late in the evening, she wandered alone from room to room, feeling the weight of responsibility more keenly than ever before, the emptiness after battle almost as heavy as the fear that had preceded it. Still, there was a peace in knowing the worst was behind her. The truth had been exposed, and the law had drawn its careful line in the sand. What came next would be up to her. A chance, at last, to rebuild in the clarity left behind by the storm. And as twilight fell over Lake Michigan and the lights of Chicago flickered one by one, Olivia Hawthorne emerged from the courthouse, head high, ready to face whatever awaited beyond the long, hard winter of her family's reckoning. Consequences and forgiveness. The days that followed the verdict seemed both surreal and painfully real. For weeks, the Hawthorne mansion remained shrouded in a somber quiet, its grand halls echoing not with laughter or music, but with the footsteps of staff moving carefully, as if afraid to disturb the fragile new order the court had imposed. The judgment had restored the estate and the business holdings to Olivia, but nothing could restore what had been lost in the battle for justice. The world outside moved forward relentlessly. Newspapers ran retrospectives on the once untouchable Hawthorne family, some lauding Olivia for her courage, and others expressing bittersweet nostalgia for a legacy now forever changed. Social invitations trickled to a stop. Neighbors offered stiff nods, unsure whether to offer sympathy or avoid involvement. The city's elite, wary of scandal by association, kept a discreet distance. Olivia carried on with the day-to-day business of restoring order in tangible ways. Meeting with trustees, overseeing repairs, consulting with new legal counsel, and making decisions on behalf of a family splintered by betrayal. The paperwork, the calls with board members, even the routine walks through the rose gardens brought little satisfaction. Everything seemed painted in the pale light of memory and regret. Late at night, when the house was truly still, the real consequences of her victory pressed in. Olivia found herself alone in her father's study, hands folded on the old oak desk, voices from the past echoing in her mind. She thought of Richard's unwavering confidence, the silent faith her mother had always placed in her, and, most of all, the brother she had lost to ambition and resentment. Nathan was gone, his presence erased from the mansion he once called home. He had retreated from public view entirely, leaving only the occasional letter from his attorney or official requests for access to personal belongings. Whispers in the legal community suggested he would face criminal charges, and he was no longer welcome in the circles that had once embraced him. Olivia sometimes caught herself wondering where he was, whether he was angry, remorseful, or simply numb to it all. The urge to contact him flared at odd moments, quickly extinguished by the bruising knowledge of all that had happened. Margaret, always delicate, so carefully shielded from the harsher business of the family, never truly recovered from the ordeal. She spent hours gazing out her bedroom window, eyes glazed with a sadness Olivia could not reach. Their conversations became halting, as if Margaret were speaking from another world entirely. One evening, Olivia found her mother in the library, surrounded by old photo albums, tracing the edges of childhood pictures with trembling fingers. "I wish I had been stronger," she whispered. The words carried a weight that settled onto Olivia's heart. With the verdict behind her and the family's affairs, at least legally restored, Olivia found herself facing a new, more difficult question. What would she do with her victory? It would have been easy to close herself off, to let pride grow around the wound Nathan had left. But as summer returned and the trees in Grant Park unfurled their green banners, Olivia realized that survival and healing demanded something deeper than justice. It demanded forgiveness. Forgiving Nathan seemed unthinkable. His betrayal had been more than a personal affront. It had been a calculated act to erase her, to turn her own sense of duty and love into weaknesses to be exploited. Yet, sitting in the solitude of her restored office, or walking along the edge of Lake Michigan, Olivia found her anger cooling to a deep sorrow. She reminded herself of the brother she had once known, the generous, mischievous boy who had relied on her steadiness, the companion who had shared secrets and dreams in midnight whispers. One morning, almost on impulse, Olivia wrote Nathan a letter. The words did not come easily. She wrote of childhood memories, the ache of their father's absence, and her hope that one day there could be understanding between them again. She did not excuse his actions, did not diminish her own pain, but she ended with a quiet offer. "We will always be family, even if we are forever changed." The letter vanished into the postal system, with no promise or expectation of reply. Olivia also had to contend with her own sense of self. The ordeal had transformed her, sharpened her resilience, but also threatened to harden her heart. She refused to let that happen. She threw herself into meaningful work at the Hawthorne Foundation, focusing on programs that provided scholarships for young women facing barriers much like the ones she herself had endured, albeit in different ways. The act of serving others helped Olivia find a measure of peace that the trial and its outcome could not provide. Over time, small signs of healing emerged. Margaret, with gentle encouragement, began to attend garden walks, sometimes reminding Olivia in soft conversation of her father's favorite flowers and the stories behind them. Olivia reconnected with a few close friends, answering questions about the trial honestly but refusing to dwell in bitterness. She mended strained relationships with distant relatives, extending olive branches where she could. Months later, an envelope arrived, familiar handwriting on the outside, the return address, that of a small town far from Chicago. Nathan's letter was brief, its tone raw and unpolished. He wrote of regret, the pressure he'd felt, and the shame that now shadowed his days. He stopped short of asking for forgiveness, but ended with, "I wish things had been different. Maybe, someday, we can talk not as adversaries, but as brother and sister." Olivia read it twice, then a third time, feeling something inside her quietly shift. She knew there would be no easy reconciliation. The wounds were too deep, the losses too keenly felt. But forgiveness, she realized, was not a gift for Nathan. It was a choice she made for herself, a way to move through sorrow without letting it define her. As autumn returned and the city began lighting candles in its windows for another long Chicago winter, Olivia found herself in the rose garden on a bright afternoon. She watched as the last blooms clung stubbornly to their stems, survivors of both storm and silence. With a quiet sense of resolve, she let her past be her foundation, not her chain. In the end, consequences remained. Estrangement, changed reputations, a family indelibly marked by its trial. But threaded through those consequences was something quiet yet powerful: forgiveness. Olivia had chosen, again and again, to step forward, not for revenge, not even for vindication, but to reclaim the gentleness and hope that had once defined the Hawthorne home. The future would be uncertain, but it would be hers to shape, with strength, with grace, and above all, with the willingness to forgive.